what's the situation in? Hi, Prime Minister. How are you?
Good morning.
Very good. Oh, very good. Good to see you.
My pleasure. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I saw that on the news there is a situation of COVID in your is not good. Like it's one of the
Where?
in Kyrgyzstan, where from Prime Minister is.
Yes. So recently we combined statistics on real COVID and so-called pneumonia diseases. In total, COVID is about 25% of total cases. So when you add statistics with so-called pneumonia without results on the total numbers increased something like four, which is quite bad. But I think the government did it well because it's not hiding anything. It's just showing everything. And so-called pneumonia cases really. The situation is not good. Government was not prepared well. That is what's happening, unfortunately.
Yeah, but the situation is not good. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Yes, I can see you, and you have a very beautiful background. In the post-COVID-19 era, recovery era, and we have Prime Minister Shavkat Aziz of Pakistan, Prime Minister Jomart Aturbayev of Kyrgyzstan, Musa Marab, Prime Minister of Mali, and Ambassador Franz O'Donnell. He's a very good friend and one of the eminent experts on United Nations, let's say so. Before, on the way starting, if we can just, everyone can take 3, 4, 5 minutes time, express its points about what the multilateralism is facing now. I mean, because there are lots of issues that we are facing today, and it's unprecedented, actually, times, because we see that international organizations are collapsing. That is, the main country is standing on the back of the multilateralism is United States of America, and now United States of America is withdrawing from the multilateralism at all, and we don't know how the elections may go on. I just had a very good discussion with Prime Minister Gordon Brown weeks ago, and he pointed out a very good thing that United Nations actually set up to be mankind's best hope. But is it so now? And also in 1945, former Prime Minister Attlee at the UN London meeting, his quote, our enemy is not any nation, or not any religion, or not any race. Our enemy is poverty, disease, hunger. Our enemy is destruction, and our enemy is desperation and chaos. And that's the challenge we are facing today. But if we are facing all of these things and we can't understand what's going on, and we do understand what's going on, but we can't consolidate our strengths, because big countries are fighting to each other, where this point will be very important about US-China relations, as Kyrgyzstan is a neighbor country, and on an economical background, because how it's going to be impacted poor countries, because we see that America is spending $700-something billion on recovery, and Europe a couple of days ago agreed also another $700 billion euros for the country. But isn't it possible, to delay debts for the African countries, which is no more than 20, 40, or 50 billion euros? And we know these countries are not going to be able to recover from that destruction. And with that, if I may, Prime Minister Shavkat Aziz.
Yes, sir. I've prepared a few remarks on the pandemic. Is that what you want? But I can speak on anything you desire.
Definitely. No, definitely. Your remarks, please.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here. I would like to share some of my views on the current pandemic and see what our experience has been and what we can learn from others. It's hard to generalize that any one country's response will be similar to the others, although many have followed similar patterns of lockdown with differing levels of enforcement. One thing is universal, however, and that is that when such a crisis happens, people turn to governments to act, and they often have high expectations. We have seen the importance of the big state model take hold across Europe, United States, where governments intervened in every sector of activity. And in the this is because when a crisis of such proportions happens, governments must be agile, must disregard old norms, and move quickly to help the people and to deal with the emergencies which exist. I want to share some of my experience of what it was like when I was in government and a major crisis hit all of us. One of the hardest tests of my career was managing relief after a massive earthquake, where we lost thousands of lives. And earthquakes, unlike a pandemic, doesn't give any advance notice. So we had to deal with everything in a shock mode, and we succeeded. We succeeded because we had the ability to move quickly. We got the world behind us. We got the leaders of the world to come. President Bush came. I mean, there was leaders from all over the world came to Pakistan, looked at the damage, and with the help of Secretary General Kofi Annan and the UN entities, we put together a whole program for Pakistan only, which is now being used by many other countries. Now, this issue we face today is slightly different. But a lot of the things we learned in this earthquake, some of them are being applied today. Firstly, the need for swift, decisive action is paramount in any pandemic and any crisis. Governments that took decisions quickly and spread of the virus was contained then. Those who didn't move quickly lost a lot of lives and got a lot of criticism. Communication, ladies and gentlemen, is the key. It's not enough to decide on a strategy. Being able to communicate it to the public, as well as the people on the ground, is key to success. Now, in our case, the army played a major part on the earthquake, and that's why we were able to tackle it in a very effective manner. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic we face must be a wake-up call for all of those who think that unilateral action is the answer. We must let this crisis and the economic fallout from it usher in a world where protectionism and inward-looking policies should be discouraged. And as we have all argued many times, that a multipolar world is much better than having a unipolar world. The existence of new world powers could be a source of strength for the world and sort of strength for the nations of the world. And it will also help us fight poverty. We have spent the past few years concerned about changing power dynamics, and the tectonic plates shifted away from the West to Asia, and notably because of China's emergence. While questions will rightly be asked about how the virus started in China, how it spread, and what could have been done differently. This question still remains unanswered, but a time will come when we'll have the answers. We must do more to share personnel, equipment, and R&D, particularly in the global search of a vaccine. Today, the crying need of the world is a vaccine. And ladies and gentlemen, as you know, we have some good news. We, meaning the world, has good news, that we may be heading to usable vaccine, one from the Oxford Initiative and the other from the Chinese, which has already started being implemented in pilot stage. So let's keep our fingers crossed. This would be a game changer for all of us. We must also do more to share personnel, equipment, R&D, particularly in the global search for, as I said, the vaccine. Every country can produce its own. When this crisis is over, ladies and gentlemen, governments must take a new look at their approach to international affairs. Over the past few years, we have seen major powers of the world growing further and further apart, and cooperation between the P5, in my view, is at one of the lowest levels I've seen in a long time. This cannot be allowed to continue. We need to get our act together, and all of us together can play a key role in allowing this sort of cooperation and mutual take place, the ideal side I just mentioned. I also want to touch base upon the role of multilateral organizations in this crisis. The World Health Organization has a particular important role to play and is spreading correct information, and during this pandemic has played a very acceptable role. The United Nations can also be a force of good in this issue and can be more active in dealing with the pandemic crisis, which has affected all of us very seriously. Now, ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 does not recognize borders, which means compared with other natural disasters, the dynamics of how governments should respond changes immediately. We have to think regionally and globally in looking for solutions. We have to think to see how we deal with this major pandemic which has affected. Not all countries, particularly in the developing world, have the right specialists in-house. Not all have experts in pandemics and in many other ancillary problems which arise. Once the peak of the pandemic is over, we must set up a proactive, empowered disaster relief effort, which will be collating what we did and see how in future crises we can manage these situations. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will conclude by saying that what is needed today is global cooperation. What is needed today is the multilaterals like the UN and the WHO and many such organizations to come forward. And we need leadership at every level. This pandemic is not over. There will be other pandemics coming. So we need to support entities like the WHO and the UN, etc., but also build domestic capacities to deal with it. We have to learn from the best experiences of everybody and then take it forward. I hope we get more time to discuss. I want to keep this monologue at a minimum. So allow me to stop now and then go on to the chair, who will probably start a discussion on these and other issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now, I would like to ask Ambassador Francis O'Donnell, because your engagement with United Nations and United Nations institutions, it's now lacking with taking responsibility, but not only responsibility because they are facing lots of attacks from the countries which been used to stand in the front line of the multilateralism, like United States of America and other countries, when it's withdrawing from World Health Organization, UNESCO, and the Secretary of the UN not in condition to call for a ceasefire. How we are going to expect that there is going to be, are we going to expect the United Nations to have a change? Or if there is something like, hope that we are going to have something better, or it's going to be like, up to the nations to decide their future.
Thank you very much, Roshan. And thank you also for hosting this panel. I think it is great to see the Nizami Ganjavi International Center play this important role as a facilitator of public dialogue. You put the finger earlier on multilateralism, and I think part of the problem is that we have been, for many decades now, in a sort of political climate of attributing blame and failure to the United Nations because so many global problems continue to persist, because conflicts have not necessarily been resolved, and because we are weak in our collective response to the COVID and previous pandemics. But on an earlier panel, one of your speakers made an excellent point, which is that the problem for the United Nations is that we are putting too much of an onus on the Secretariat and not enough responsibility on the Security Council and, in fact, the membership in the General Assembly. And from that point of view, many countries have been cutting back their support to the UN. And I remember several years ago in Turkey, when I was asked by some school children to give a talk, and they were saying, well, how big is the UN? And I said, well, it's so big, so many members and so forth, but it has a budget about the size of McDonald's, hamburgers. And, you know, it employs about as many people as the Fire and Corrections Department of New York City, or for that matter, the municipality of Stockholm. And they were absolutely overwhelmed by these comparisons. In other words, we don't have the resources deployed at the global level through the United Nations and other international instruments that will allow us to deal adequately with the sorts of challenges we're facing. We need to make the UN, in other words, more fit for purpose and improve its efficiency rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But if I may just take another few moments to say what I think we could be doing about the global pandemic. First of all, I think we have never in human history, for thousands of years, experienced anything quite so universal, so deep, and so dramatic. A cliff edge drop in all key performance indicators that affect human well-being. We have passed already 15.5 million caseload of COVID, which is, 14.5 million more than we were talking about 3 months ago. And 3 months ago, we were looking at 50,000 deaths. Today, we have 650,000 deaths. If you were to look at some of the other figures, they're equally shocking. And the American Centers for Disease Control has been pointing out that perhaps the American caseload may be 10 to 13 times higher than what the actual statistics look at. So we are going to see, unfortunately, millions of people die before we can truly speak of a post-COVID-19 world. And the question is, what are we going to do about it? I mean, the IMF has already indicated that global GDP would fall by about 5% this year. That's up by 4% in what they were saying 3 months ago. But the indications for the second quarter of this year, year on year, are already that global GDP has dropped by 10%. The OECD has been very gloomy, talking about a 6% fall forecast for the industrialized countries. But that's predicated on avoiding a second wave. We know already that the second wave is already upon us, not yet even in the winter, but in the middle of the summer. And many countries are looking at double-digit declines in GDP. Most economies will fall into recession. China looks like a bright spot that it may go up 1% in GDP, only because they dealt with this early head-on and they've started a recovery much quicker. But India's economy is likely to decline by 5%. Mexico and Brazil, we're looking at a 10% decline. And where job losses are concerned, the ILO, which was estimating 25 million 3 months ago, is now talking about 400 million people unemployed and 2 billion people in the informal sector facing serious life-threatening impoverishment. For foreign investment, the UNCTAD is looking at trade falling by 30 to 40%. And in fact, the IMF observed that in the second quarter of this year, there was a divestment of $83 billion out of developing countries since COVID struck. Now that figure, that's an enormous exodus of capital from the developing world. And in fact, it's the same volume as what the EU is about to give Italy as a grant to overcome COVID, roughly the same figure. So we're looking at economic globalization being completely uprooted. And I think there are 4 simple things that we can do to help tackle post-COVID recovery. And these are spend your way out, borrow, but borrow smartly, go green, and save the planet. Now, if I can just spend a moment on each of those. Spend your way out. We need considerable increases in fiscal stimulus and public spending for a direct response to COVID-19, boosting and reforming public health services, surge capacities, and prevention and stockpiles. We also need to look at a universal basic income. And in fact, some have pointed out that such a basic income would help people to stay at home in the poor countries, and that would help reduce the actual prevalence of COVID-19. We also need to look at labor-intensive public works as a way of expanding employment opportunities in the short term, especially in environmental remediation. Beyond that, we have to boost SMEs and try and avoid taxation increases. Deflationary spending cuts should be avoided. Inequality should be reduced. We need to continue to bring down the Gini coefficient. And I would say that all of this boosting of public expenditure will actually reverse a pattern that we've seen in recent years of the weakening of the state. It will help to strengthen the state as an institution. That should not induce mass surveillance. So that would be my first point, spend your way out. The second point, borrow smartly. Why borrow smartly? Basically because countries can deploy their borrowing capacity, preferably in a regionally mutualized way, like the EU 27 countries are now done for the first time. Steering fiscal stimulus towards post-COVID recovery in this way is almost a no-brainer. Why? Because we are blessed with the lowest interest rates in over 30 years. We are in a long-term decline in interest rates since the early 1980s. And with interest rates on government debt kept very low for many countries, not necessarily every country, but for many countries, it enables countries to borrow very, very cheaply as long as the risk premium is kept low. The third thing I would say is this is the time to go green. Lockdown declines in productivity, energy consumption, and pollution all represent a golden opportunity to go green. Global decarbonization by 2050 suddenly seems attainable. Governments worldwide can shift electricity generation from fossil fuels to renewables. The costs of converting to renewable energies are now practically totally affordable, making decarbonization financially and environmentally attractive. In many cases, grid parity is already achieved. The costs are equalized between fossil fuels and renewables. And as you know, Jeff Sachs has estimated that substantial decarbonization, let's say 80% by 2050, would cost 1% of global GDP or less. And fourthly, the last thing, let's focus on achieving the SDGs. We had a pre-COVID financing gap of $2.5 trillion to achieve the SDGs and save the environment. That price tag, $2.5 trillion, sounded enormous, but in a sense, in retrospect, it was practically affordable. We consider that global GDP was about 88 trillion last year, $88 trillion according to the World Bank. And we're talking about spending only 2.8% of our global wealth to save humanity and save the environment. Compare that small amount of $2.5 trillion to the COVID responses and fiscal stimulus amounting already to $11 trillion without counting in the EU's $2 trillion extra that has just been agreed in Brussels. So I think there are these four simple steps. Bend our way out of this situation. Governments need to be not shy about increasing public expenditure, borrowing to do so cheaply with interest rates at a historic low, going green because this conversion now becomes affordable and essential to help renew the economies, and basically focus again on achieving the SDGs, without which we will not be able to make the kind of progress that we need to. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Definitely, your point was very interesting because exactly the economical field is going to definitely change so dramatically because now million jobs are going to be lost because more offices are not realizing that they have no demand for renting lots of offices. They can work from the distance, like from home, and it's less expensive. And but also there is a very big, while going to Prime Minister Jomart Oturbayev, there is a big problem that what we are realizing now is vaccinalism challenge, because every nation is like trying to grab like it's China, it's mine, America, it's mine, and so on. And how small countries we are going to adapt to that situation. But also what is going to happen with the two major powers in the world, what we are having? It's United States of America and China. And how they are going to deal with their issues and how we are going to respond to that.
Thank you, Roshan. Of course, I will try to answer a question, but I want to make my main points on the leadership, what just you put ahead. First of all, I would like to express my appreciation to Nizami Ganjavi International Center and yourself personally for making enormous and very fruitful jobs during these difficult times by bringing leaders from around the world to the same institutions, to the debates, and to generate new ideas. This time is not wasted, but on the contrary, I am observing that your international center is getting very active and very efficient. Thank you very much for doing it. This is very important. On the leadership, I wanted to put ahead some ideas on how leadership is even more important those days than ever. What pandemics is teaching us? People get scared. People put ahead some priorities for the state to be more as a guardian or defender of their private interests, maybe not as important as it was before, as generator of wealth and jobs and revenues. We can see that states are getting stronger, even in liberal states. They take more responsibility. We're also observing that reaction to the pandemic were more efficient from so-called strong states like China, Singapore, or Vietnam. On the contrary, the most liberal countries like US or UK demonstrated a very bad reaction towards the pandemics. So now people thinking what would be the role of state in arranging and securing, safeguarding people's life. It's very important. It should be lesson learned from everyone. And unfortunately, we will see some tendency of so-called sovereign globalization when the particular characteristics of certain nations or certain societies will be underlined more. But during this tendency, when people lock down in their own yards, homes, flats, own countries, very important to demonstrate again that globalization is very important. What about leadership currently? So pandemic is making few very sharp cases about development of the global world. We can see that the war of wars and actions are getting tougher between China and the United States. There is overall consensus that it will be a quite significant Cold War between those countries. But what I would like to underline now is that there are some good news in terms of leadership in the world. I specifically wanted to mention the decision by EU 27 on the 21st of July, when they decided combinedly, they decided to first some in principle to massive collective buying. But what is important, even more important, that they build trust between themselves in very heated debates. So this is a great example. This is absolutely case which have been taken as difficult global case, but which realized in an absolutely historic decision. Then Europe can get together on collective borrowing. For example, 8 years ago, countries were reluctant in going to collective borrowing. But what I can see now that the leadership of Germany, which completely changed the attitude toward this problem, completely changed atmosphere in the European Union. Now they're going to inject 770 billion euros into economy, both in loans and in grants, and to help to those countries which were mainly damaged by the pandemic. This is absolutely terrific. But there are also bad news coming out of the current situation. This week, US Congress and Senate agreed upon the economic sanctions against Russia to Europe gas pipeline Nord Stream 2. And Germany was very aggressive in the response to this action. It looks like that Europe, led by Germany, will go for a very tough relationship with the United States as a reaction to the sanctions. So we see the three kind of centers of political, economical, military centers of the world are in very difficult situations now. Of course, people vote for the November election in the United States for something concrete or something serious will come, lowering down the tension in this angle. But again, pandemic is a created situation when many difficult cases get much sharper, much quicker. We all have to take care of the fragile world, which we are now. As you said, what smaller countries should do, I don't think that we could do much in terms of influencing into the global fight between top 3 or top 4 countries in the world. I can include Russia to this situation. But of course, you, as an international sector, could bring more of smaller countries to the same kind of debate and to generate our joint ideas on how what pandemics teach us, what can we do. On multilateralism, absolutely, it will be tendency. Now is the name of the game, how smaller countries could be united, more united in providing ideas, influencing development of the world. Yes, vaccine. I don't see that vaccine could be a big issue. Actually, there are kind of scientifically robust countries like US, European ones, Russia, Japan, China would generate their own vaccines. It will be competition. I don't rule out that it will be political wrestling between them. But at the end of the day, competition is good. Let everybody kind of make vaccine. Let's the World Health Organization be part of these stories. The more competition in the scientific area, the better result we will get. Again, the call about vaccine from facilitated by Nizami Ganjavi International Center is very important. I would suggest that we could, as smaller countries, can arrange a certain format in putting ahead ideas which will be heard by everyone in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Prime Minister Mustamar, can you hear us?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us. And one of the discussion main topic was about the situation in Africa, because Africa countries is going to be affected, especially with the economy. How you see the situation and what you see that how the world community should be reacting towards the African countries. because we, at the end, we still don't know the real status of the COVID-19 in African countries, because there is not that much testing, and that's providing us lack of information. And the floor is yours, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, my friend. I would like to present my excuse because I have no camera on my laptop. You cannot see me, and I see all of you. This is my chance, my advantage. I have no camera. It is a choice. It is for a safety reason. But I think you can hear me. Secondly, I would like to present my apologies again because my English is very bad. Mali is a French-speaking country, it's not an English-speaking country, and my English is very bad. I will try to speak in English with my bad English, and I hope you will understand me a lot. You are right when you say no more information about the reality of COVID-19 in Africa. If you consider the number of cases, it's half of million, little more than half of million in entire of Africa. This rate is very low. If you do a comparison with the other part of the world. But the reality is very, very, very worried than that, because testing are very, very weak. The system of testing are very weak in Africa, are very low. If testing would be higher than now, I think the number of cases in reality is more than several million in reality in Africa. What is the change in Africa? It's the low rate of death. Apparently, the people in Africa can our body has have a system who are fighting with successfully against COVID-19 than other parts. This is a reality in Africa. This is why the death rate are very low in Africa. This is a reality. And the first thing I would like to say is COVID-19 is not over in Africa, and is not near of over in Africa. It's a reality now. And our focus must be to strengthen our health system, to be able to test more people, to invest in testing, to be able to know how many people has COVID-19 in each country among Africa, and to be able to manage that. The main thing in Africa must be that instead of economic recovery, instead of economic strategy post-COVID-19. We are not in a post-COVID-19 period. We are in the COVID-19 period now, and I think we have not reached the peak. The peak is far, is still far in Africa. This is my opinion. If I take the number of cases among Africa, the first remark is in the austral areas in Africa. For example, South Africa, on the northern part in Africa, for example, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, the most cases in Africa are on these two areas. At the same time, the two areas are the most developed part in Africa, are the areas which test the high number of cases in Africa. The results on these parts of Africa is due to the testing, the number of testing in South Africa and North Africa, Morocco, Tunisia. In our areas in West Africa, the number of cases are very low. We are 16 countries, and we have 200 million people. At the same time, the number of cases globally is less than 200,000. And the death rate are, the number of deaths globally on the Western Africa part is low than 20,000 deaths. This is the reality, the reality of case and the reality of death. And the reality out of the figures, the official figure is, I think, worse than the result. This information are to say, firstly, we are on COVID-19 problem. We are not over, and we are not fighting successfully against COVID-19 disease. We have to strengthen our health system. We have to increase our capacity of testing. We have to increase our equipment among the hospital. We have to increase the number of doctors or nurses, all of things like that. I think the most important thing in Africa is that. Secondly, after to strengthen the health system, I think the first action for state or our regional organization must be to give a grant to poor people and to help them to be able to get food, to be able to pay power, energy, to be able to pay transportation, to go on their work, on their shop, on the market. Poor people represent in Africa more than half of the people, more than 50% of the population. And the poor people, and especially on the urban area, the city, the poor people are very, very, very shocked by the economic consequences of the COVID-19 disease. And the first action states must do is to help poor people and to put them to grant. Poor people before companies. In the economical way, we are not such touched like a developed country, because Africa is not as connected to the global economy like European and United States and other parts. This is our chance. This is why the drop of GDP, economical GDP in Africa will be 1 or 2% only compared to other countries, 1 or 2%. And the recovery will be fast in the future. This is the prediction of our researcher. Okay, I think the main issue for Africa is to be able to face and to manage the COVID-19 disease by strengthening the health system, and after that to be able to support poor people, especially in urban area. I think this is the main issue for African country now. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I would like to tell, two things before going to the questions. That we are happy, one of our members, Helen Clark, is now chairing high-level panel for the World Health Organization for checking how effectively they are responding to the call of the COVID. And also we joined the Lancet Commission, the Lancet 19 Commission on research COVID-19, and President Vaidevika Freiberg and Dr. Ismail is one of the commissioners. Besides that, there was like a call to the G20 countries where we've been also, Prime Minister Shavkat Aziz, Jomart Oturbayev, and Ambassador Franz O'Donnell also joined, to calling European Union countries and international organizations like World Bank and IMF and others to sink and to delay with the payments of the debts, because it's clear that European African countries will not be able to pay it for 2020, and neither it's going to be able to pay for 2021. And if we compare with the amount and with the percentage of how small amount it is in compare what European Union and America is spending on their expenses, it may be really helpful, because then African countries can build up with that money school system, education, healthcare, and so on. Now, while we go to questions like everyone can answer, now we are like, what's going to happen in your opinion with in the upcoming years? Because COVID-19 is not going to end up soon. By statistics, it shows that if in March there was maybe 10,000 or 15,000 COVID cases in India, but today is over 1 million. And now we have a new center of the COVID-19, which is Latin American countries, and they are like Brazil is, it's unprecedented way, like, you know, how fast it's growing up. And United States of America, the most powerful country, is in sometimes it's not able to overcome the COVID-19. And despite they have an election process, and I think that they will be too busy. And here we have another big important country, which is China. And China's role is also growing, because they are a major sponsors, and they are holding One Belt One Road initiative, which, because it's a massive project which involving like more than 50, 70 countries, which is like, you know, bringing to the economy additional income. Like in case with Kazakhstan, Prime Minister maybe like he can confirm that one of the biggest investors are Chinese investors. And but still we have a conflict with India, and we have a conflict with the United States of America and European Union. We've been talking about European Union. Yes, it's definitely the biggest project of the history, but what will happen with if Angela Merkel is going to leave? Because we all know that she is a leading figure for these projects, and she is a leading force for that. And without Angela Merkel, if we will have another populist leader with a major locomotive of economy, of democracy, of support for everything. How we are going to manage it? Prime Minister Shavkat Aziz? Sorry. So, 1 second. Can you unmute yourself?
Done.
Yes.
Thank you. I can shift the order of the reply just to get my thoughts together. First of all, you mentioned just China. As you know, Pakistan and China have a very special relationship, so I can share some of the various things we've done which may be of help to other countries. First of all, China now is a major lender and financier to Pakistan, and more than any other entity in the world. It used to be Europe, it used to be United States. Now China is number one. And when I was Prime Minister and Finance Minister, I negotiated all these deals with China. And I must say, compared to any other lender, bilateral lender, this was the smoothest negotiation. The conditions were reasonable, and the atmosphere was very good. China has come a long way in terms of developing its financial sector. The banking system and some other areas still need more work. I'm biased because as a banker for 30 years, I always have perhaps standards are different than others. But in terms of government-to-government support, I found China quick, China very understanding, and less costly than the other alternatives we had. And Pakistan borrows from everywhere in the world. So I think China has to be looked at in the future as one of the key players in development finance and also emergency credits. They've helped Pakistan on the balance of payment side also, apart from projects. The One Belt, One Road is the best thing which happened to Pakistan. Dams, roads, power generation, there's a comprehensive plan and being executed by both China and Pakistan. It was quite pleasant having dealt with the other countries and even the multilateral institutions. The negotiation with China, surprisingly, and having been a banker myself with a small bank called Citibank in the United States for more than half my working life, it was a pleasant change in negotiation. They have come a long way, and I think in any global financial reform or effort, we must get China on the table. If they aren't there already, we must bring them in and make them party to what we are doing, because they will be very attractive contributors to the cash we need. Of course, on the one short comment on the corona issue, the pandemic issue, we can learn something from China. To Pakistan, we have just invited their experts to come and look at our program and see what we can do better, because the sort of issue started in China. They fixed their local issue domestically, and now their domestic rates of expansion of the pandemic have come down substantially. So they're helping us. We don't have results yet to give you, but maybe in 6 to 12 months, we'll have a good idea as to what's happening. So I think having worked all my life in the United States and worked closely with the administration, and I still do, the US has a different approach. Europe is somewhere in between, and then China is on the other extreme. Also on the multilateral side, these institutions like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and the Latin Bank, and many others, all these, while this is not the topic of today, they are desperately needing retooling, restructuring, and really changing the paradigm. They were built in a different environment, and the world has changed, and they are against change. I mean, you can quote me on that. I've had many discussions with these institutions on how to reform, how we can help, how everybody can help. They are just scared to change. But I think it will come, and all of us have to put our thoughts together to make our voice stronger, that you have to be part of the global financial sector. China, other countries, whoever have the balance sheet to support it, should be invited. And the US, China, and some of the other countries in Europe, if they join together, I think the world will be a better place. Join together not in structurally, but on the financial side, dealing with each other, having more trust with each other. I think we'll make progress. It's possible, but obviously having talked to governments on both sides and dealt with both of them, we are still not at where we should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Today, when we see like what's happening with the Chinese consulate in US, the American consulate in China, it's like, you know, when everyone should be focused more on COVID-19, but everyone like just moving out to different political games. And ideally, it will be definitely when everyone will join in the same table to discuss the common issues, but we know that the world is not the ideal place, and it's not going to be happening because we have to empower Secretary General of the UN, and we have to empower members, state members has to empower United Nations to.
Sure.
That will be the biggest problem, like, you know, for upcoming years. Then, Ambassador, today we are just also facing another big problem, that it's about education. Over 1 billion children been left out of the schools, but we have to take into consideration that most of them are even not having computers or any equipments, like, you know, to have a proper educational system. How it's going to impact to the upcoming years, because we hear that governments are prolonging this lockdown for a longer period. What do you think about this?
Well, I think this links to another point you were making, which is that in the less developed countries, the developing countries, perhaps we better call them, there is this major problem of the overhang of debt and what can be done about the debt problems, especially if they were to do what I was suggesting, which is to actually increase public expenditure in a variety of ways as an exodus from the COVID crisis. And from this point of view, I think what is most important for these countries is debt forgiveness. And there are a number of leaders of creditor countries who are quite in favor of substantial debt forgiveness, or a mix with rescheduling the debt repayments, which would be sort of the slightly harder option, the soft option in terms of soft for those debtor countries, is to reschedule the debt. But what's very important in this, and it's very interesting to hear Prime Minister Shawkat mention the relationship with China and how Pakistan has benefited enormously from the Belt and Road Initiative and all the investments that are going with that. Pakistan, of course, especially with His Excellency the Prime Minister, has been extremely well placed to negotiate on optimal terms for Pakistan the various financial aspects of the relationship with China as a creditor country to some extent. And what is most important for other countries, be they in Africa or in Central Asia, it's to have a really good ability to negotiate the legal and financial aspects of debt agreements. And the UN Institute of Training and Research, UNITAR, has for many years had a program which was very much to the fore in this, in promoting the training of people in the legal aspects of debt management. So that's a fundamentally important thing, because too often these debtor countries are getting into relationships with creditor countries that are absolutely not on the best terms, suboptimal, and they're paying heavy prices down the road. And some countries in Africa, for example, Zambia and Tanzania, have taken strong stances against exploitative relationships that can otherwise exist. So, but as I said, the best way forward would be to have substantial debt forgiveness for these countries so that they can start focusing on the issues of health in the first instance and education. Absolutely. And you're quite right. It is very important for students in these countries and across the world to have access to the technology which can help reduce the disparities in sort of access to the internet and access, in that sense, to online education. Another aspect that you touched on earlier, though, has to do with the shift in employment practices, as many companies are asking, and even governments, asking people to work from home. So what is happening in this situation? Actually, they're transferring the burden of operating costs to some extent to the domestic budget of the household, you know? And my wife, for example, at the moment is working from home. And, you know, we are subsidizing with electricity, with other utility expenses, etc., the work that she's doing for her employer. So at some point in time, however, there will need to be some sort of an adjustment. And you are right to point out the shift in the use of office space is going to be very dramatic. In fact, when we look at, in the context of my own country, where we've had a very robust economy before, and we will climb out of it at the moment, but not without something like a 14% drop in GDP. We're already looking at situations of surplus office capacity being very difficult to fill. And so how can you repurpose office space? And one way would be to look at it as potential future housing. But again, the question that COVID raises is the shift in residential preferences for people. You know, in a sense, we are probably looking to a future which is less urbanized than it is at the moment. The emphasis will be taken off high density, inner city living, where people are actually more vulnerable to infection from pandemics, especially respiratory diseases like COVID. And people will want to move out to the open spaces, to the fresh air. And we might see, you know, a reinvigoration of the countryside, in fact, as has been happening in some countries, in Spain, in Germany to some extent, and in some Western European countries. So I think you put your finger on it. It's one of the many multiple challenges we face. But I think on multilateralism, one of the things that's most important is to look at the whole question of UN reform, and in particular, the reform of the UN Security Council. Now, there has been a movement in recent years with pushing for reform. There is the document on the revised elements of commonality and issues for further consideration, the question of equitable representation, an increase in the membership of the Security Council. And this has really gone forward extremely slowly, but progressively. But it does require a majority of member states, and it does require to ratify it in the General Assembly. And then it would still be required to be ratified by 2/3 of the member states in their parliaments, and it's a long way off. But I think correcting the imbalances in representation in the Security Council and reforming the whole question of the veto is extremely important. But let us not forget that the relationship between the Security Council and the General Assembly is itself inherently, I would say, democratically dysfunctional. We have a situation where 5 veto-wielding powers potentially can lay down the law for the entire planet, and yet the General Assembly resolutions don't have anything like the force of compulsion, let alone enforcement, that Security Council has. This needs to be corrected, and maybe we need to be looking to a future where there is, I would say, a supermajority of member states and of global population that could have resolutions passed in the General Assembly that will have more compulsion and perhaps some instruments of enforcement. Otherwise, it's hard to see as a planetary civilization that we can bring ourselves forward in the way that we should.
There was like, Ambassador, the interesting point about resolutions, difference of resolutions with the General Assembly and the Security Council, but sometimes both of them are useless.
Yes.
Depending which power can be like, we know that in my country, in Azerbaijan, we have a war started again with Armenia, and casualties, and it's not with the occupied territories, but it is with towards like, which is inside of Azerbaijan. And there is 4 resolutions and 4 another statements of the United Nations Security Council, but it's still laying down as statements and nothing is moving on. Prime Minister Oturbayev, can you, what do you think about how we should address the small countries without economical impact, without economical income, like, you know, no big tourism or energy resources, how they are going to overcome this crisis? What they are looking like? Because I know that Kyrgyzstan doesn't have natural resources at all, and it's mainly dependent on international trade. And when international trade is also locked down, how it's going to affect the economy entirely, and how the small countries are going to plan to recover?
Yeah, it's a huge shock for my country, since we didn't have any reasonable reserves to be kind of used for this emergency situation. I would say that a big thanks to the multilateral development institutions, for instance, International Monetary Fund, other like development banks, World Bank, other regional development banks, as well as many our friendly governments, which provide very generous financial assistance to the country during this difficult situation. Yeah, it's good to observe that multilateral development institutions were acting to help poor countries. I remember that before the spring meeting with World Bank and IMF, the letter, which was signed by many of us and presented by Gordon Brown, played significant role in agreeing of G20 donor countries to freeze the repayments and debt interest for this year to the poor countries. It's released billions and billions of dollars for the national governments to accumulate the potential repayment of the debt to multilateral and bilateral donors. I would specifically underline China, which became the biggest donors around the world, who first time in history to schedule payment debt. This tendency should be continuing. Looks like the pandemic will not finish very soon. Not that it's magic kind of January, February next year, or invention of vaccine which will stop this disaster. I am more of real sense person, and I think that this pandemic will spread more and more. What would happen with poor countries? Everybody just trying to invent their own scenario on how to survive. So far, there's no major revolutionary actions from poor people, for instance, in many countries, though they are losing the sources of income. But it cannot be last forever. I agree that this current pandemic should bring new architecture of the modern world, where, let's say, with the leadership of G20, some fundamental reforms could be provided in terms of, let's say, international governance model. But what we're observing, as many of us mentioned today, that there is a very aggressive politics from the US, which fighting with everybody in the world, including the big one. So this kind of solution cannot be found in short term. At least we have to wait for November elections before things, let's be more clear. It's very difficult. Many of us in Africa and Asia, in countries without natural resources, without special, let's say, guarantee funds or cash in their account, feeling real pain. Now, maybe, Roshan, you can again think of initiating another initiative, which would be continuation of the G20 call for rescheduling of poor country debt for this year, for the 2020. We are also going to see soon the annual meeting of World Bank IMF in Washington. Maybe we can generate some kind of call. What is available, what is possible to maintain certain stability in the world, especially in the view of kind of sustainability of poor countries. This is very dangerous, let me say this. Many people in our countries live out of day-to-day earnings. And when there are lockdowns, when there are everybody just behind the closed doors, neither taxi drivers, nor small traders, nor cooks or waiters can earn. And the social tensions in these countries will be growing. We shouldn't allow it. So perhaps, let's say, our call for the October annual meeting of IMF World Bank would be would be very appropriate to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Definitely, these actions was very important because you know that we already initiated 9 calls with United Nations AIDS program on free vaccination with Muhammad Yunus, also like free vaccination, and the importance that when we get vaccination, and we have to make sure that the poor countries are having a free access to that. Not to have like yesterday Jeffrey Sachs was saying the cost will be $10, but in the market of United States of America you will get it for $3,000. Like most of the things are done. That's for sure. And international organization solidarity is important because every voice matters. And I think that the only thing that what we can do as international organizations, we just have to find out the ways how to mobilize society, and because it's also not only a discussion between each other, but it's also for society, because more and more people are hearing your thoughts, and it's also helping, like, you know, to have more understanding what's going on, because there is, like, you know, with President Trump created a new slogan, fake news, that it's like becoming, like, you know, an addiction. Everyone is, like, you know, starting discussing, is it good news or is it bad news? Is it true or not? But it's our life. As with Prime Minister Musa, I would like just to ask, as a last, everyone, what do you think, what's the lessons we learned from the COVID-19? Prime Minister? Oh, sorry, 1 second. Prime Minister?
Okay, okay, it's okay.
Oh, yeah, perfect.
You hear me?
Yes.
The first lesson is what I said on my introduction is the weak of our health system. We have to strengthen our health system to be smart, to be able to prevent, to be able to test, to be able to manage a pandemic like COVID-19, I think. And the second, by an economical way, you mentioned the cancellation of the project of a cancellation of debt for the African countries. The reflection are going on about this issue. My understanding is it will be positive for African country if we take this occasion to invest massively on the interconnection on the African countries. The future of African economic will depend on the trade between African countries. And to help this issue depend on our capacity to build a highway, road, power generation shared by several countries, and to connect more African countries. I think if the cancellation of our debt could allow countries or regional community to have resources and to invest on the regional equipment, the regional infrastructure, it will be a good thing for Africa and the economic growth of Africa. I think we have to study this way instead of consider the country one country to one country, to deal with one country to one other country. We have to consider Africa at whole, or Africa at a regional level, a regional infrastructure to help Africa to have a strong economy. I think it will be the next goal for African countries or African regional economic community. It will be the next step. It must be the next step. We have to deal with that and to help Africa to have a strong economy and to be able to rebuild our state, our capacity on health issues, on educational issues, on training issues, on research also, and to allow African country maybe to get our own vaccine or the next pandemic maybe. I think these two issues must be the most issues to manage in the future, the next future, strengthen health system or and rebuild regional infrastructure to connect more African country and to help African internal trades and put up the economic, the African economic instead of focus on one country to one other country. I think it will be better to consider that issues. Thank you.
Yes, Prime Minister. Mute.
I have finished.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, Prime Minister. Now you.
I have unmuted again.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. What I hear and see and in today's discussion and many others, like all of us are having these days, the healthcare side and the financial side are two major areas which are affecting, as a result of the current crisis we have, the pandemic crisis. These need attention and need out-of-the-box thinking. On the financial side, unless we have some of the key countries, and I will be very specific, United States, because they are one of the countries which has a veto on a lot of these institutions. I think on the finance side, we really have to get the World Bank, the IMF, and other institutions lined up under one tent and coming up with a program where countries which are in financial distress or potentially will be because of this pandemic, we come up and start now. UN alone will not be able to do it. No disrespect to the UN, but in terms of IMF, World Bank, and the regional banks, if they can come together, I think that will be a much more, UN can also join them, but we will need some lending programs for countries which have been adversely affected. There'll be you can do a common sort of approach, and especially for the really seriously affected countries, so that this program can be funded and released to the various countries. It's easier said than done, I realize that, but we have to start talking and lobbying about the fact that this issue is not just a health issue, there's a big financial issue also in many countries. And I think you will find that a lot of the countries will be willing to help, provided a good institutional framework and priorities are set and transparency is there. Institutional framework will get it going. Now, if we leave it to the IMF or we leave it to the World Bank, that may or may not be the only way. So I think the countries will have to come in and also be active and then use these institutions to come up with programs. If this happens, it could be a game changer for the world. If it doesn't happen, I think the health situation and the financial situation both will create almost catastrophes around the world. If we haven't seen them yet, you will see them. So we have to take it on a war footing. And I think using the UN and the Secretary General's influence or credibility to put this in public, to come up with the countries all on one page. And I think if that happens, most countries, will be surprised, will support it. But if we do nothing and keep moving from one crisis to the other, our coming generations will never forgive us. So my call is for urgent action, collective action, bring everybody together. And those who don't want to come in the big powers, they'll be identified then, that these countries don't care. We'll then deal with them too. But you have to really do this through the umbrella of the UN. And I think if we can get an access to the Secretary General, anybody from here or as a group, we have to emphasize to the UN that they probably represent the best entry point. And then from there, you can go to the IMF, you can go to all the other financial institutions, etc. But the UN umbrella will be, in my humble view, having dealt on some of these issues before, will be the best one to open doors and get the pandemic behind us eventually. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Prime Minister Oturbayev raised his hand.
Thank you. Just one sentence. I don't believe that UN can do anything quickly. I don't think that IMF World Bank will do anything without G20 commitment. So we have to work hard with G20 leadership, those who are willing to provide leadership. So we have to generate ideas and to work via G20. Thank you.
But if we can take along UN, it'll be good. Sorry, I don't know whether you heard this. Go ahead.
Ambassador. Yeah. Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you very much. This has been a very interesting discussion, and I want to thank all of the other participants, the prime ministers, and yourself, Rovshan, for stimulating it. But there are a few things that have crossed through my mind as we've been talking and listening. And one is the big G word, not so much the G77, but the governance word, and which is of concern to many of us. And also the role of the private sector and civil society in overcoming the crisis, which in fact COVID has sharpened our awareness of a number of global problems that have pre-existed. So let's use this as a platform to add dramatic urgency to addressing all of these world problems. And I think if we look at the SDGs and the achievement of the SDGs by 2030, which was optimistic perhaps in the current circumstances, number 16, which has to do with peace, security, and strong institutions, is particularly important, especially for civic education, for human rights and good governance. And as we are talking of leadership in a sense, maybe I should just mention that what we really need to climb out of this in a sustainable way that brings humanity forward is leadership which meets the highest ethical standards with a strong sense of duty and responsibility for others, a strategic vision that can mobilize energies constructively, is inclusive, inspires trust and confidence, and demonstrates transparency and integrity. But for that to happen, we need to have a thriving civil society, a diverse and independent media, and an independent judiciary. These pillars of society are extremely important because they enable active citizens engagement, media engagement, although we need to be careful of market concentration in the area of media and the sort of the dwindling influence of different smaller diverse media. But all of these things are important also to hold leadership accountable, to prevent state capture and to prevent regulatory capture by vested corporate and organized criminal influences. And for this reason, I think it's important that we take this moment to have more countries take more seriously the UN Convention Against Corruption. Most countries have signed on to it, but they've actually done very little about it. And if we don't deal with corruption, we're going to have a much higher cost of recovery than we would otherwise have. So on that thought, I want to thank you very much for allowing us to have this discussion today.
It's an honor. Actually, I wanted to say something different, but you made me to change my mind and to quote my most favorite quote, let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests and to the means by which these differences can be resolved. And if we can't end our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal. John F. Kennedy. And I think that's the best word that can be describing that we are lacking leadership. And we have to understand one important thing, that without, if there is any country who is lacking with the COVID-19, we are never going to be able to say that we are safe. Neither if you are in India or if you are in Pakistan or in China or in United States of America, it's going to be spreaded. And because of COVID-19 showed that as human nature is developing and technology is developing, these diseases are also like, you know, mutating themselves to a different way. Thank you so much for everyone for joining, but at the least I would also would like to thank you so much for joining this as a last statement that which we prepared for Azerbaijan, because it was really important for our country, for our integrity and this territorial integrity. And it was like, you know, a friendship solidarity from your side. Thank you so much. And hope that we'll be in touch very soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rushan. Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you.